Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, Rogue Macro. This is a free post that I put out on the Substack just a few minutes ago, and I wanted to read through it to give you a video version, and I'll be putting this out very shortly. So this is a topic that I've thought a lot about. I did write a post about it previously that went at a different angle. This is a new angle that I just recently kind of stumbled across, so I wanted to read through this, but the main idea is that we're told this about ancient China was on par with the West. And we had these two kind of poles of the world. And even India as well would be maybe a third pole. But is that really the case? I don't think it is. This is important because that's what a lot of this stuff is built on when you start talking about the rise of China. But anyway, that's in this post, so I will just get into it. Where is ancient China? This post is going to be an unfinished format. It's a bud of an idea that I'm still researching and trying to consolidate into a rock-solid argument. This is just one thread of many that I'll be writing about on this topic in the future. The main idea is that the modern world holds a deeply mistaken belief about the strength and sophistication of the ancient Chinese economy relative to the rest of the world. This misconception greatly exaggerates China's historical economic position. Why is this important? Not just for academic debates, but for real-world decisions, policies, and even investment theses. It feeds the narrative that China's rise today is inevitable because it was once a global superpower or powerhouse. At the same time, the West is gripped by a strange self-defeatism. Many Westerners believe their own civilization and identities are fundamentally evil, and that we must flagellate our culture to atone for our sins. That shapes how we see China, as a victim of Western evil in the Century of Humiliation. And now that we're expanding our critical consciousness, China will once again rise to become a global hegemon. That is completely untrue. The economic center of gravity problem. So I came across this topic while researching the McKinsey Institute discussion on the evolution of the economic center of gravity in the article Urban World Cities and the Rise of the Consuming Class. Really, I dove into this McKinsey stuff because of a tweet from Balaji about, 6 months ago. And that's when I started diving down this rabbit hole more and more. And so here we are. They reported the economic center of gravity being in Central Asia for millennia, then shifting north and west with the Industrial Revolution until it approached Greenland in 1950, then moving rapidly back toward the east in the last 100 years. So you can see, started down here around the year 1, and you would expect that would be long-term, like even 1000 BC, right? So around the year 1, the year 1000, it's in the same sort of spot, like northern Pakistan. Anyway, so they show that it's going rapidly over here. Of course, we have the rise of the New World, and the US is baked into this big move. So it's not a one-to-one like the West versus the East, because the US, it actually moved further moved further west. But then the rise of Japan and China, are swinging it way back this way. But you can see this U-shape kind of forms a narrative, right? There was balance here for a long time. Then this balance was overturned briefly, temporarily, and now it's returning to balance. That's the narrative that they're building here, and that narrative is just not true. So, measuring ancient GDP. The problem is the data underpinning this narrative. Modern GDP is calculated as consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. This framework was developed by Simon Kuznets in 1934 and only became a global standard after Bretton Woods in 1944. So it's very new, 80 years old, this way of figuring out GDP. And it's funny that we come back to this argument of GDP because, a lot of people bitch about the inflation measurements not being right. Well, I think the inflation measurements are okay. They could be better. Obviously, I think the trueflation is probably a good iteration on measuring prices. But GDP, I think, has to be massively overhauled as well. And that is going to be much harder because all of our statistics a lot of them are based on GDP. It's the granddaddy of macroeconomic measurements. So but it has no applicability to the ancient world. So how do researchers estimate ancient GDP? They largely rely on population counts, especially through the Madison Project. Madison includes a few modifiers like agricultural productivity, scraps of wage and price data, urban rates, and recorded trade were available. But the foundation is still population multiplied by an assumed output per capita. And the biggest change here that is this agricultural productivity and urbanization. So they give some benefits to highly urban areas, which itself is kind of fuzzy because we don't know exactly how many people were in these cities. That a lot of times the population measurements range from 200 to a million for the biggest cities, right? In these ancient times, and 200,000 to a million, or anywhere from say 10,000 to 50,000. That's a big change. And effective urbanization. And these are all based on very, very rough estimates. But the agricultural productivity piece, this is because in China, he gives them a bonus actually for agricultural production, the productivity of the agriculture in ancient China. But anyway, okay. As a total, as a whole concept, though, this is a big problem. GDP is supposed to measure output, Yet these ancient GDP reconstructions effectively ignore the physical evidence of output that still exists today. They give equal economic weight to civilizations whose material legacies or material outputs are wildly different. What do I mean by that? Just look at the material output of the Mediterranean. This is dating back to 2500, 3000 BC. And this outer core is a reconstruction, but there is still the inner core is still the same. And, so we know what it looked like. We actually can see these things. Ancient Egypt, not sure what era this is from, but it's probably from, around the year 1, maybe down to 500 BC, something like that. This amphitheater is just beautiful. And these were everywhere, absolutely everywhere. When I was looking for breakwaters, because I wanted to put an image of a harbor in here, because that is a very important distinction as well, I couldn't find a real good one. The best one is the Caesarea one from Israel. It was built pretty late, I think, around 100, 200 AD, and it just has a hippodrome and an amphitheater, just like secondary in the background. So yeah, this output is just massive from the West. So I could list Western and Near Eastern ruins for pages like ziggurats, temples, amphitheaters, aqueducts, waterproof harbors, paved roads, palaces, fortifications. Much of it still standing, and much more excavated in original form. The material output is overwhelming. Remember, it's all about output. Okay, we're measuring output. But where is this output from China? They have nothing at all like this. Not even close, guys. This is going to blow your mind. All right, so let's get into the China. We have no surviving evidence of large-scale durable architecture before the 6th century in China. I probably should have put that in there. Lack of Chinese evidence. The oldest extant building in China is the Sungwei Pagoda from 523. And the reason why this exists still is because it's made out of stone. It is just a solitary building, though. It does have supposedly some other ruins around it, but they don't exist anymore. So this is one solitary building in the wilderness, basically, and it's made out of stone, and it dates to 523 AD. That's the oldest building that they have. Nothing earlier survives. Not palaces, not temples, not monumental infrastructure. Everything you see in China that they try to say is ancient is not. It's a modern reconstruction. I even looked for, because I double checked on, because they say their excuse is timber. It's all timber construction. And so I went back and I said, aren't there ancient wooden structures in the West? Like beams in old structures? And yeah, there still are. There are still things with original beams. And they might not date to the year 1, but they date to the year 1000. So there should be some evidence of this stuff. The modern stuff you see is all recreation. So I went back and I said, what's the oldest wood building in China? And they have one that dates to around the year 1083, I think it is, 1083. All right, so here it is. It's the Nan Chan Temple, and you can see the image here. It's just this real small building, and we don't know if it looks anything like what it did back in the year 700. I think that's when it was built. Let's see, 782 during the Tang Dynasty. Escaped destruction, isolated in the mountains. Another inscription on the beam says it was renovated in 1086. So again, we don't know if this is the original building from 782 or expanded and redone it totally different in 1086. We have no clue. And then it was renovated in 1970. So everything you see here is not ancient. It's completely modern. Nothing is left. We have nothing left of ancient China. Okay. So let's go back to the post. Scholars and laymen alike will try to convince you that there were so many grand ancient structures in China, same as the West. They have simply all deteriorated because they were made of wood. Well, that alone should tell you, something made of wood versus stone takes a completely different level of civilization. But that doesn't solve the problem. I'm not saying that the Chinese built nothing, but it was primitive compared to the West. And that's important when you're talking about GDP and output, right? That might trigger some people, but it's true. We know it's not survivorship bias either, because there's no written records of these grand buildings. And we have written records from ancient China, but we have no written records of these ancient buildings. Prior to 523, there are no records of great buildings and architecture in China, either physically or textually. So not in ruins or in writing. We have no surviving structures. We also have no detailed architectural writing. The earliest references appearing in the late Han Dynasty, that's the 1st and 2nd century, offer only the most basic descriptors like height and vague units. So they'll say, it's like a literary style, rose 100 rens high. Well, that's not an exact measurement. That's just like you're doing a poem and you say it's 100 rens high, So in vague units, account of stories, so 3-story tower, materials like jade, okay, whether the building was square or round. That's not architectural, that's just like literary flourishes. Real architectural detail in China begins only in 1103. That is the first time that Chinese writing provides technical dimensions at all, like real dimensions, standardized units, proportional systems, proportional measurements or whatever, construction sequences, and material specifications. It arrives over a millennia after Vitruvius wrote De Architectura in 14 BC, a work that already contained architectural theory, mathematical proportions, engineering methods, detailed guidance on everything from foundations to acoustics. So that we don't have anything like that from China. Why? Because they weren't building it. When one civilization has no surviving monumental architecture before 523, and only really a handful of these fragile buildings before, the year 1000, no technical documentation before 1103, while the other civilization leaves behind vast stone monuments, roads, aqueducts, harbors, concrete engineering, and detailed treatises, it becomes obvious that their economic and technological capacities were not comparable. Madison, and by extension McKinsey, assume roughly similar per capita output for China and the Mediterranean world in antiquity. So going back to this map, the way they get these dots over here is because they assume equal per capita GDP, which is not the case. The physical and textual evidence shows this is false. Comparing Rome and Han China in 100 AD is economically analogous to comparing a modern industrialized nation to one still barely out of the agrarian stage. Any GDP reconstruction that treats them as peers is absurd. So this is only one thread of many on the topic. There are more of these comparisons to explore, like literature, materials, engineering, infrastructure, science, trade, technology, state capacity, and even modern industrial patterns. I'll be pulling on these threads in the future. Now, again, the reason why this is important, subscribe this video, and go to the Substack, roguemacro.substack.com to subscribe. But the reason why I'm writing about this is because, again, it's not the case that China is rising back to its, peer status as a global hegemon or as a superpower. That's not the case at all. We need that to infer where we're going in the future. Okay, so Hope you liked it. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.